history of man is one of subjugation and not liberty. The question is, can we sustain this American experiment in which our freedom of choice, freedom of action, has brought so much prosperity to most of the world, frankly? Since my youth, I've always searched for and supported candidates for office who demonstrated deep-seated understanding of the nature of human liberty and what's necessary to enable and protect it, and also who showed the intelligence and dedication to fight for that liberty. People like Barry Goldwater, Ronald Reagan, Fred Thompson, Ted Cruz. The three elected officials you're going to hear speak tonight are such rare men. I'm extremely proud to be able to introduce the first of those men, one with whom I've been fortunate to work in the cause of freedom for 16 years now. Representative Matt Winshittle leads from the front, which makes him a target, but he doesn't back down. He joined the U.S. Marines in 2001. Remember, that was a tough time. After a tour in Iraq, he served in the reserves until 2009. You might think that his experience as a Marine shaped his character as a leader, but knowing him, I suspect that his character is what led him to join the Marines, frankly. While still serving his country in uniform, Matt decided to serve his state in the legislature and was elected to the House at the age of 23. He could have chosen to be a quiet backbencher, but that wouldn't have served his constituents or honored those who designed our representative government. Instead, Matt took on not only the mundane tasks of governing our state, but took the lead on multiple controversial issues. You wonder why some of these things are controversial, but they tend to be. Issues of life and liberty. Essentially, when Matt entered office, the law of Iowa was, thou shalt not have a gun, except. And the major exception was if you had a permit to carry weapons. Except that, at that time, the county sheriffs had absolute discretion over whether to issue firearms permits, and they could put any restriction they wanted on them, and there was no appeal. Now, after many years of legislative efforts led by Representative Winshittle, if the state wants to deny you your right to possess or carry a firearm or other weapon, it must have one of a very few specific reasons. And there are very few places where you can't carry, and we're working to pare those down even further in this next legislative session. It took a very lengthy list of changes to get Iowa to this point. Perhaps Matt will want to highlight some of those victories, but they include shall issue weapons permits back in 2010, permitless carry in 2021, and the adoption after 12 years of effort of the Freedom Amendment that added strong protections for the right to keep bear arms to Iowa's Constitution for the first time. Matt's skills and dedication did not go unappreciated by his fellow legislators, and he soon rose to leadership positions in the House. In 2019, he was elected House Majority Leader, a position he continues to hold today. The job of leading so many Republicans must often seem like herding cats, but I know his colleagues hold him in high esteem. I want to also thank Matt's wife, Ivalise, and his two daughters for their willingness to share him with the rest of the state, particularly during those long winters when the legislature's in session. It's a great honor to welcome Representative Matt Winshittle, Majority Leader of the Iowa House and Second Amendment champion par excellence. Oh, there you are. I thought you were in the back.
All right. Thank you, folks. Thank you very much, Richard. Before I get started with what I'm going to say, can we all stand and say a pledge of allegiance to our flag, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, folks, thank you very much for coming out here tonight. Thank you for being willing to participate in this town hall. As Richard said, this is how these elections should go. You should be able to hear from people that are seeking to serve you, that are willing to answer your questions, hear your concerns, and be able to be responsive to you. So I want to give you a little history lesson real quick. When I first started, I started in a trifecta that was in the minority. All right, I was 22 years old. I did not know my ass from my elbow in politics, literally. I had not gone to college for anything but gunsmithing, and I was sitting there in the minority for 4 years, and I was watching, and I was learning, and I was listening. But one thing that I knew that I needed to do was to be able to advance our fundamental freedoms and our fundamental rights. It's one of the reasons that I chose to run for office. So when we got into the majority in 2010, that was the same year that we were able to pass shall issue under a Democrat trifecta because they knew that we were coming for them. And we did. And we won the majority in the Iowa House, and we took the governor's office back. So it went from being the situation where you would have sheriffs across the state that denying people the opportunity to carry a firearm for any reason they deemed necessary. So we went from may issue to shall issue. Now, in the intervening time when we had divided government, we fought every year to try and advance your fundamental rights. And we were successful on some fronts. Richard has been there by my side the entire time, and I can't say enough about the great work that Richard Rogers and Iowa Firearms Coalition does. So Richard, thank you very much. So, in that time, we were able to legalize suppressors. And of course, all of the nanny staters were saying, oh my goodness, you're gonna have all of these scenes out of the Hollywood movies and people are gonna go pew, 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 and you'll never find them, right? Well, we proved them wrong, all right? We were able to legalize suppressors. What year was that? Was that 2015, Richard?
Suppressors was in 16.
16, all right. Well, in 2017 is when we finally were able to get a trifecta of Republicans. So when we had that trifecta, the Senate was finally flipped over to Republicans. One of the first things I did was I called Richard. I called Michael Ware, a good buddy of mine who's also with IFC, and I said, Katie, bar the door. Let's put all this stuff together, all right? We created the biggest and most comprehensive Second Amendment legislation that any state had ever seen. We called it the 2A Omnibus. Michael called it the Burrito Bill. There were so many people that were just baffled at how we were able to put, it was about 17 different divisions into this bill. And it ranged from parents being able to teach their children how to handle firearms when they're under the age of 14. Such an archaic law that we'd been trying to get repealed that we finally were able to get it done. We legalized short-barreled rifles, short-barreled suppressors. We also finally got stand your ground. All right, so you can defend yourself where you have a lawful right to be. You can stand up for yourself. You don't have to try and run away first. All right, we got so many great things done in that bill, and it was monumental. We rewrote the shall issue to make it more streamlined for you to be able to go out and get your permit. We also made sure that we were able to, when you move from one county to another, that you could get your permit renewed there at the sheriff's office without having to go through all of the other rigmarole. But in that time, we also were able to start the process, which we had started previously, of passing a constitutional amendment. Now, granted, there was a little snafu there in 1 year, but we won't get into that. But we were able to finally get that constitutional amendment passed through 2 general assemblies, and then this last election cycle, it passed on the ballot. It passed so overwhelmingly Democrats' heads were spinning. It passed in 97 of 99 counties. Want to guess the 2 counties it didn't pass in? Story? Johnson. All right. It even passed in Polk County. All right. So thank you for those of you in Polk County. Now, some of the statewide electeds don't like it when I say this, but that amendment passed with more votes than what Governor Reynolds got, than what Chuck Grassley got. It had the highest margin of victory of anything that has passed with those constitutional amendments. So we now have in our state constitution, you can go and you can look at it. It's right under section 1, and it's 1A. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It's there. But the other thing that we did, and it took a long, hard work to get it done, we made sure that it was not going to be misinterpreted. We made sure that the courts were not going to be able to come in and say, well, they said it, but we're going to regulate it anyway. We made sure that a future General Assembly, if the pendulum swings back, is not able to come in and water it down. We said that any restriction, any and all restrictions, shall be subject to strict scrutiny. That tells the courts they have to put it at the highest level of judicial review. The state has to prove why they would want to restrict your right, and guess what? They're not going to be able to do it. Your rights are protected here in the state of Iowa with that constitutional amendment. Now, one of the other things that we were able to do, and it took 15 years of proposing it, going through different machinations of it, trying to convince legislators that it was the right thing to do, we finally moved Iowa into one of the categories that most states don't have, but Florida does. Thank you, Governor DeSantis. We were finally able to pass permitless carry, constitutional carry. You no longer have to ask the government permission to exercise your fundamental right to keep and bear arms. So we've made a lot of progress. There's still work to be done, and Richard and I know that, and we are going to continue to fight in the legislature. I see some of my colleagues right here that have been with me in this battle, so thank you, gentlemen, for helping. But we're going to continue to try and make those advancements. But one of the things that concerns me is that even though we've done the right thing here in Iowa, and Governor DeSantis has done the right thing in Florida, If we have a chief executive in the White House that is unwilling to respect and recognize our fundamental rights, they're going to continue then to allow the ATF or the FBI or the DOJ to come in and force unconstitutional provisions on you. They're going to weaponize those departments. They already have shown that they're doing it, and they're going to continue to try and break away and chink away at our fundamental rights. We can't have that. We need somebody in the White House that is going to tell those departments, no, you don't get to do that. You don't get to do it by bureaucratic fiat. If you're going to do something, it comes through the Congress, and then it comes to me, period. I'm concerned that we've had some other candidates out there that have already said that they're willing to negotiate. They're willing to barter when it comes to your fundamental rights. That is unacceptable. We've got other people in this race that have literally said when it comes to things like red flag laws or ERPOs that, yeah, we can do, take the guns first and then we can do the due process part of it later. That is unacceptable. We have to stand up against that. So, you didn't come out here to hear me talk, but they did want me, the campaign asked me to go through and highlight some of these things because these things are on the line if we don't have the right people in elected office and if we don't have the right person in the White House. That's why I'm proud to have endorsed Governor DeSantis early on this spring. I've been out there with him on the campaign trail at multiple stops. I've seen how hard he is working, how hard First Lady Casey DeSantis is working. I have seen them. They are the real deal. They are honest people. They have gone to all 99 counties in Iowa, the only campaign to do that. That is showing respect to Iowans. That is showing Iowans that they want to hear from you. They want to know what your concerns are. They want to be able to take those concerns and turn them into positive action on your behalf. That's why it is an honor for me to say that I've endorsed Governor Ron DeSantis. He is the right person at the right time to not only lead our country, but to lead the free world. So without further ado, please help me welcome the next president of these United States, Governor Ron DeSantis.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks, you all, for coming. It's great to be here. Thank you so much. Oh, please have a seat. Please have a seat. It's exciting to be here. I thought about, because we had a little bit of a meeting before, we were talking about some of the issues affecting the country, our constitutional rights and all this stuff, and I thought about a discussion, and look, this is a story that goes back to the founding of our country. We had three of our founding fathers, Benjamin Rush, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin. They had a debate about what was the world's oldest profession. And Benjamin Rush said, Rush was a doctor, so he said the world's oldest profession was a physician because Eve was cut out of Adam's rib. It had to be the physician. Thomas Jefferson, who I think you know designed Monticello and all these other things, said no, the world's oldest profession was the architect because it was the architect that brought order out of all the chaos in the universe. And Benjamin Franklin said, no, that's not right. The world's oldest profession is the politician. Who do you think created the chaos in the first place? And I think about it, and it just rings so true today because so much of the problems we see are self-inflicted by an out-of-touch political class. And we can talk about all the different issues, and we've done it throughout the campaign. We'll continue everything from crime to border to educate. It's all very important. But one of the things our political class has done is they've really failed to safeguard our Constitution and to protect our constitutional liberties. And this has happened over a number of years, but we're now in a situation where you used to talk about debates over things like Second Amendment rights about, okay, what might this legislature do or what might Congress do to infringe your rights? And that's still something that's important, but it's even gone beyond that to where a bureaucracy, without anybody ever voting any of these people in, can just decide that something like a pistol brace is illegal, and they can render, with the stroke of a regulation, millions of people to be felons. Just with that, without any debate, without any due process, without any of that, that is a government run amok. That is a bureaucracy that is not in tune with the constitutional design. The Founding Fathers created 3 branches of government. They did not create a 4th branch of government, an administrative state. And yet we have the administrative state doing this stuff, and it's not just in the realm of Second Amendment, it's in the realm of so many other things. But the fact that they could criminalize something through executive fiat through a bureaucratic edict without having any democratic debate, not having your representatives have to vote on that, that is a danger to all constitutional rights, not just the Second Amendment constitutional right. And so, and truth be told, no one had ever really tried to do that until the Trump administration did it. They really set the ground rule when they tried to do this bump stock thing. Look, it's just a piece of plastic. All of a sudden, people are going to be felons because they have a piece of plastic. So they tried to do it through the bureaucracy. The courts, I think, correctly are putting the kibosh on that, and I don't think it's constitutional to just simply rule something illegal like that. But that's what Biden's following. He's following that playbook. So this has been done in 2 successive administrations. When I'm president on day 1, we are going to reel in this administrative state. We're going to reverse the pistol brace rule. It's going to be gone. You're not going to have to worry about that. So we've come a long way to where we should be as Americans, but we need to restore the Constitution to the centerpiece of our national life. If we don't do that, then a lot of these other battles, you can win a battle on taxes, you can win a battle on border, and they're important, but ultimately we're not going to save this country unless we get the Constitution back first and foremost and these rights respected. And it's not just, yes, the Bill of Rights are important, but it's also the structure of the government. You know, the Founding Fathers didn't even have a Bill of Rights in the original Constitution. The people that opposed the Constitution were the ones that read. And the founders, the reason they said is because, you know, you have a legislative branch, executive, they check and balance each other. That's really the number one protection of freedom, and that is broken down because Congress doesn't do its job. They delegate to the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy does things without. So we need to get all of this back into whack. And if we don't do it now in 2024, I don't know that we're going to be able to have a chance to get it back in whack. So I'll be a president that will do that. I understand, you know, Matt can talk about this, but I remember taking the oath to join the Navy and commission. And you take that oath, and what they ask you to do is not even to defend the country or defend the homeland. It's to support and defend the Constitution. That's your oath that you take, and that anyone that wears a uniform can risk their lives for. So we need to do that. I'll be a president that will do that. We will respect and we will restore the Constitution of the United States of America. And that'll be a legacy far beyond 2 4-year terms in office. It'll be a legacy that will last generations. So I got a friend from who's a U.S. congressman from Kentucky that I'm going to bring out here in a sec. He is somebody that is a stickler for the Constitution, and he takes votes that sometimes he'll be the only one of 435 to vote based on constitutional reasons. But that is the type of thing that when you're willing to stand alone for what you think is right, is something that is admirable, and the time he did this better than any time in his career, and one of the most courageous things I've seen any elected official do was when COVID hit. When COVID hit, you had March of 2020, Anthony Fauci assuming control of the government effectively, and basically saying that, you know, the world was going to end, you can't leave your house, all this stuff, and basically saying, shut down the country and then have just Congress print $2 trillion and just pay everybody. I don't know what they thought would happen, but that was what they were going to do. But here's the thing. The Congress, the leadership in Congress, they didn't even want to have to vote on printing $2 trillion. They wanted to be able to add $2 trillion to the national debt without even taking a recorded vote. So nobody would have been responsible for this, and they were just going to plan on doing it. In the dead of night. Well, Congressman Tom Massie said, no, that's not the way constitutional government works. We're not going to have this republic die based on unanimous consent where they're hotlining $2 trillion. So he objected to what was going on. He took more flack than probably a congressman has taken, certainly in my lifetime, because of the hysteria. See, we kind of forget, I think, because we're 3.5 years past, just how crazy it was at the time. And he was getting hammered and hammered and hammered. and he stood tall. He forced all these congressmen to come back and do their job and to actually put their names to this piece of legislation. And the thing is these congressmen were saying it was too dangerous for them to do their job, but they expected the people at the grocery store to get their groceries and the people at the fast food place to serve them in a drive-thru and all that. So they wanted everyone else to be doing it. They didn't want to have to do their job. So he did it. He stood strong. But he said at the time, if you guys do this, you're going to pay people not to work. You're going to cause problems with the supply chain. You're going to create inflation, all and on down the line. And every single thing he warned about ended up happening in the United States of America. So I was proud of him for being willing to stand up at the time when very few were able to. And I'm proud that he's supporting me for President of the United States. And I want you to hear from him right now. So come on out here, buddy. Thanks, man. Is it on? Boom, boom, boom. Here, take that one.
He's being modest. Let me tell you the rest of the story, like Paul Harvey says, right? So I got in my car and I drove to Washington. Okay. I drove to Washington, D.C., and I got there I left at midnight from Kentucky, and I got there at 9 a.m., and I stopped everything they were doing. Only one person had to object. And so they called everybody in from around the country. And we're sitting there ready to pass this bill, and I've got to watch the microphone and make a motion, and I get a call from 0000000. I'm like, who would have a phone number that's Trump? So I let it go to voicemail. So then, like 30 seconds later, I get a call from that same number. I'm like, doesn't he know I'm busy? So I let it go to voicemail. 3 times it went to voicemail. And I thought, well, he'll leave a message. And so a 4th call, somebody left a message and said, you need to call the president back. So they yielded some time, and I knew they couldn't snap the ball. So I walked out and I called the White House switchboard back. And this voice comes on. I'm coming at you like you've never seen. Never in your life before have you seen the way in which I will come at you. I'm more popular than you in Kentucky, and you know it. I'm going to back your primary opponent, and you're going to lose. So then I tried to explain, this is constitutional. Like, you can't spend $2 trillion with nobody here. And Mr. President, it's going to pass anyway. So he started screaming at me for like 3 solid minutes. And the more I tried to speak, the more he screamed. And he goes, no, this is the 2nd time you've done this. And I was immediately hopeful because I'd done it like 8 times and he forgot. On the fake Obamacare repeal, I didn't go along with that. That was fake. They were not going to let you buy affordable insurance. That was a fake repeal. I would not let them do that either. But he had forgotten about that. But anyways, he repeated it all, and everybody hated me. Nancy Pelosi went on TV, MSNBC, and called me a dangerous nuisance. You know what? I think we need more dangerous nuisances than Nancy Pelosi. So Trump called me a third-rate grandstander on Twitter. Anybody remember that? So I walk off the floor. The world's crushing me. Fox News hates me. Drudge Report hates me. Like, everybody was hating me. And the media said, what do you have to say for yourself? Your own president just called you a third-rate grandstander. And I said, I was very, very mortified by that and offended. I said, I'm at least second-rate. So anyways, when everybody was hating me, I got a call from Florida. And I'm like, I think it was Daytona Beach, whatever your number comes up. And because I got a new phone, and I actually lost his number. I didn't tell you this. But I'm like, well, maybe that's Ron. So I take it, and it's Ron DeSantis. And he said, you know what? You're taking a lot of flack. He said, and I know the polling on this. Remember, there were $1,200 checks for everybody. That was the cheese in the trap, okay? $1,200 was the cheese in the trap. But that bill was 80% popular with Republicans. And I was the only one who would oppose it. And this is the only guy who called me to offer support. And he said, you know what? It's wrong. And we can't shut our governments down. We can't shut our economies down. We can't deny our kids an education. He said, I know the polling is against me in Florida. He said, but I am going to do the right thing because in 2 years, people will know it was the right thing. And I said, man, I hope this guy runs for president someday. By the way, I built this, it's a debt badge that I wear on my lapel. I'm an engineer too. I'll pass it around. Somebody make sure I get that back. But it's to shame my colleagues. When they look at me, they have to see the debt updating in real time every second of every day. I love getting on an elevator with Adam Schiff. One of the congresswomen, she was staring at my chest. I said, my eyes are up here. Like, they can't look away from the debt when I'm wearing it. And I've been saving, by the way, this guy is the Energizer Bunny, Ron DeSantis. I cannot keep up with him. I'm worn out. I drove 700 miles yesterday to get here because you guys matter, right? By the time this election gets to Kentucky, it will be decided, and you're going to decide which direction it goes. And that's why I came here. I can barely keep up with this guy. We've been on planes, trains, and automobiles today. I'm not exaggerating. His kids were excited. How is it a train? Is it a plane? What is it, Dad? But I brought another debt clock that I built for him to have, so he can keep track of the mess we're making in D.C. All right. All right. This will be, and I know it's a town hall, and we've got to quit speaking, so I'll sit down and let you guys drive the discussion. This will be the most pro-Second Amendment president we have had in 100 years, bar none. So please get him elected.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, we'll take some questions. Anyone got anything?
I have that question because I know you talked about.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the things that were passed in that fight, that was a huge aspect of the inflation that we're dealing with. You know, as an economist, somebody who studied it and actually tutored it at a college level, like a lot of the things that they were doing is actually a huge reason we had inflation even before Biden got in. Now, I also think it was the worst possible plan that we could have done. What can we do, starting with you currently in office and going into if Ron becomes president, what's the game plan? Because there's a lot of people here that can't make it, like at all. Like even Senator Rick Scott from Florida said that $750 extra a month for people in Florida, that's 90% of an SSI beneficiary's income. They're dying in ditches and abandoned buildings. What can we do to actually end the Fed?
Yeah. Well, listen, the Fed did enable this, and here's what we did. It's worse than borrowing money. They created $5 trillion out of thin air under Trump's budget director, Russ Vought. And I give him grief for this. I call strikes and balls here, okay? You know, a lot of this is due to Joe Biden, but have you added up how much was under Trump? It was like
$7.8 trillion in 4 years.
That's a record for anybody, Democrat or Republican, and a lot of it was created out of thin air. We can't undo it. The only way you could undo it is to tax that money, bring it back in, and burn $5 trillion and take it back out of circulation. And that would kill the economy too. We are stuck. Those prices you see, they are baked in. But to keep them from going up more, we got to cut spending. That's the only monetary thing we can do. But.
Well, and you know, we worked together on like auditing the Fed and stuff like that, because what the Fed has done is they've taken so much power over the economy when they're, you know, the role of a central bank should just be stable currency. And you should not be doing, I mean, they started the quantitative easing for the financial crisis. That was supposed to be extraordinary measures, and they just kept doing it for so long. And then when COVID hit, the Congress did the $2 trillion with the CARES Act, and then they really, really created a lot of money and pumped it in. And then they said, you're not going to have inflation. When you do this, you don't get inflation immediately. It's like 18 to 20, 22 months later. That's exactly what happened. And yes, Biden came in and poured gas on the fire, was totally reckless, and he shouldn't have done it. But it was already baked in the cake for what they did in 2020. Because remember, they did another $2.2 trillion in December of 2020 which basically handed off that money to Biden when he came in, and he used that to do DEI and a bunch of nonsense that we're still living with to this day. But it was very predictable that that would happen. He said that back in March of 2020, and yet the Congress just kept printing and printing and spending and spending. For the calendar year, March of 2020 to March of 2021, I think it was like $6.2 trillion that was spent during that. And we've never, that's more than like World War II that we did. And for what? What did this country gain by that? We should have never handed the country over to Fauci in the first place. That is where we went wrong by doing that. But I do think, so I agree, spending, all that stuff. And I think, look, he's willing to cut spending. There are other Republicans that are. There are not enough who are willing to, so we're going to need presidential leadership to force them. But ultimately, we're kind of set up for failure in the sense that even if we did do a good job with the budget, new people get elected in the future. A lot of times they undo it, right? So you really need things like term limits for members of Congress, balanced budget amendment for the Constitution, line item veto for the president. I really think that those would be really good, positive reforms. But the other thing you could do to reduce inflation is to just reverse the Green New Deal and open up the energy for production, the oil and the gas. We have more of that than anywhere. It could be good for national security, drive down prices. You are seeing gas prices have gone down. I think a lot of that is because of overall economic weakness. I don't think it's because, obviously, Biden is trying to restrict. But it will go back up unless we open up. So that I would do that on day one, open that all up, federal lands, all this stuff. That would be good for consumers, but it would help drive prices in a better spot because the energy affects everything that's produced in this country.
That reminds me of another phone call I got from Governor Ron DeSantis. He said Fauci and Birx are going around and using the imprimatur of the federal government. They're talking to state health officials and getting them to shut down the government. It's like scaring them into this. He said, I have banned Fauci and Birx from Florida. And I'm like, wait, can you do that? Wait, but what he meant is you can't ban them from going to the beaches, but you can ban them from talking to state employees, right?
Yeah, so I mean, the thing is that they were doing all kinds of nonsense. And it was the kids in school, oh, that was bad. Florida, especially like the summer of 2020 when we kind of had our first COVID wave, they were like, because at that time people thought when it went up you had to shut down so that it would stop. And I knew these things had a natural cycle because I had looked at other parts of the world. So I'm like, we are not doing that. No way. I was probably getting hammered more at that point than ever, since I've been in elected office. And then we ended up right. Literally, Fauci said close. And like 2 days later, it was clear that Florida had peaked in terms of the thing. So like to close after it already peaked would have been suicidal. So he was wrong about that. But what really honked me off was that they were trying to get universities to police the students and not let them interact and stuff. And the thing is, these kids were at such low risk from this. So I put the edict out to our universities. I said, do not restrict their social lives. Let them go and be college students. Because what was happening in like the Northeast, they were isolating these college kids. That was leading to depression and anxiety, and suicides went up, and drug abuse. It was such ridiculous tunnel vision. And so you know what happened in Florida? Kids got to go. Yeah, if you were driving in Tallahassee, Florida State campus in September of 2020, you'd see them all out at the bars or at house parties or whatever. Did a lot of them get COVID? Yeah, you know what happened? They got it, they got over it, and then it left the campus basically. And so that was what we knew would happen. So, but the way that they came down on young people was really catastrophic. K-12 school closures, like in California. We did it right in Florida because when I'm debating Gavin Newsom a couple weeks ago, the governor of California, he was trying to say California was open and Florida was not during. Are you kidding me? They had kids locked out of school for a year and a half. I had families moving from California to Florida just so their kids could play sports their senior year or participate in activities. So, but the damage they did to K-12 students and college students with these edicts was just unbelievable. And so I was, a lot of Republicans aren't that popular on college campuses. I can tell you those students appreciated me for saving their college experience. They got to live like normal human beings.
The governor mentioned a piece of legislation, the Green New Deal. Most of the bills we pass are like 1,000, 2,000, 6,000 pages. When I discovered the Green New Deal was 14 pages, I decided to read it. It took 5 minutes to read the Green New Deal, and when I got done, I realized why it's 14 pages. There's only 64 crayons in the big box.
Well, in the World Health Organization, so they want to do they call it a pandemic treaty. It's really a lockdown treaty, and they want to be able to impose that across the world. Biden is for it. When this first came up, I guess earlier this year, we had I had the Florida legislature pass a law. So in Florida, we do not recognize the WHO lockdown treaty at all. So it's null and void in Florida. But when January 20th, 2025, when I take office, that'll be a very easy decision for me to just take that lockdown treaty, rip it up, and throw it in the trash can. It'll be dead in the United States once I become president. And that goes for all this stuff coming out of places like the World Economic Forum. We've done things in Florida like kneecap ESG. We banned the imposition of a central bank digital currency, which is what they want to do. And honestly, it'll affect Second Amendment rights, really, because what they want to do with central bank digital currency, they want to eliminate crypto, they want to eliminate cash, and then force all financial transactions to go through this digital dollar that is controlled basically by the Federal Reserve. You will lose financial privacy on that, and what they will do is they will impose restrictions on what you can purchase. So, for example, ammunition. They may not like that you've purchased, they may stop you. Gasoline, you may be doing more than they want. So they will impose basically a social credit score system. They will impose ways to force your behavior. And when I started raising the alarm about this, it was interesting because, the people at the World Economic Forum have admitted this is what they want to do. This is not like, but it was interesting. So I started talking about, and I use the analogy, sometimes government will do things and they're trying to be benevolent on the surface, but it's really a wolf in sheep's clothing. And that happens a lot. This is a wolf coming as a wolf. Like, if you don't recognize the threat to your freedom based on having something like this, then you just haven't been alive the last 3 or 4 years with what these elites have done. You remember the truckers in Canada, they started shutting down their transactions. The government did. They didn't have no right to do that. So I started raising the alarm, and it was like every media outlet, like New York Times, Washington Post, all these DeSantis is peddling conspiracy theories about the central bank, and they were all doing this. And I'm like, okay, why would they all? Because this is something that they want to do. And they realize it would be a massive amount of power, a transfer of power from we the people to people that are elites in government. So we will, on day one as president, also nix this idea of a central bank digital currency. That is not going to happen in this country.
You mentioned amending the Constitution for term limits and amending the Constitution for a balanced budget. Maybe also I'd recommend amending it for a flat tax.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think that there's two ways to amend the Constitution. 2/3 of the Congress and then the 3/4 of the states ratify, or 2/3 of the states and then 3/4 of the states ratify. And when you're talking about taking power away from D.C., of course Congress isn't going to do that. So Florida, we've already certified this stuff. I know a number of other states have certified, and I'll use the bully pulpit. We'll rally, particularly all the Republican states. This should not be a problem to do. And the thing is, things like term limits, they're very popular even with Democrat voters. It's not a partisan thing. I mean, these are important reforms. So yes, we've thought about how we would do it. We will put capital behind it, and we will put effort behind it, because I just think, I could go in and do the best job of 8 years. He could do the best job in Congress, but it's like, what's the long-term trajectory of this country? And the incentives in Washington, D.C. Are not conducive to this country doing well over the long term. And yes, there are some people that will do the right thing when it's not easy, like Thomas did, like I've done in Florida. But you have to think most people elected in Washington are going to follow the incentives that are placed before them. They're not going to buck that for kind of a higher calling. That's just not what happens. So we got to change the structure. We got to change the incentives so that we can produce better outcomes over the long term. So yeah, I will put capital behind it. Yes, sir.
Thank you. So you mentioned about the administrative state and how do you attack the administrative state? Because when you think about it, that's been one of the challenges that we've got this bureaucracy, like you said, that makes regulations. So no matter what the president does, or even laws get passed, now all of a sudden you've got the administrative state that basically says, hey, this is what how we interpret it, how you need to execute.
Well, look, I'll let Thomas take, but one is I want Congress to assume more responsibility. I want less power from the executive branch, and so they have a piece of legislation called the REINS Act, which is any major regulation will not go into effect unless it's approved by both houses of Congress. So this serves two good functions. One, if a bureaucracy is running amok, your elected representatives can stop that. The other thing is, if there's something that's done that's not good and your representatives vote for it, you can hold them accountable for voting and vote them out of office. And I welcome that, even though that would mean less power for me. But no, on all these agencies, you put people in, like, for example, Biden did he wants to force the electric vehicles. He's doing that through the bureaucracy. I'll reverse it through the bureaucracy. And so, we'll definitely do that. We will rein in 100%. I think the challenge is doing things in ways that are going to stick beyond just your term in office. And I think you need 2 terms to be able to really make it stick. But we're going to do things like there's 50,000 bureaucrats who are involved in policy making. We're taking them out of civil service, putting them in a separate Schedule F, and they can be terminated at will at that point. We're going to take agencies and parcel them out around the country. They should not all be accumulating power in D.C. What's happened is you have all this bureaucratic class in D.C., and they now function as a separate class of society that's separate and distinct from the American people. I look at something like the FBI and what's happened to that agency. If the FBI had been headquartered in Biloxi, Mississippi, I do not think you would have seen the culture develop the way it's been. I think it's been because it's been enmeshed in the D.C. politics and D.C. and Virginia. The personnel they've got, all this stuff has created this problem over many, many years. So that's something else we're going to do. And then we also have a bunch of other levers that we're going to pull, where you're going to have a president asserting Article 2 power to the fullest extent to basically corral power that has gotten outside what the Constitution envisioned. And yes, I'm going to get sued on it. Everything I do, we will get sued on. We know that's what happens in Florida. Every single thing I do, they sue, and they try to find a liberal judge. A lot of times they'll rule against us, then we win on appeal. That's usually what happens. But like the U.S. Supreme Court, I think they'll back us on this, because it's like you can vote somebody in as president, and the bureaucrats just laugh at that. They just do what they want anyways. That is not constitutional government, and that will end when we're president.
Yeah. Okay. I think this is the first presidential candidate who has ever come out in favor of legislation that would limit his power as a president. I mean, that is remarkable. But, you know, on the way over here, he was telling me about stuff he did in Florida, and I said, did you do that by executive order, or did you have to pass that through the legislature? And the answer was always, I got it passed through the legislature. And that's the hard work. That's the hard way of doing it. But it sticks. Everything that you've done that you put through the legislature will be in place after you're gone. And that's what we need. He mentioned the REINS Act. That actually, we debated that and had a hearing on that in my subcommittee, in the Judiciary Subcommittee. Jim Jordan wanted me to chair the subcommittee on antitrust. And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of complicated law. And isn't that the government going in and punishing, you know, winners and losers, or picking the winners and losers? He says, I'll rename it to the committee, the subcommittee on administrative law, regulatory reform, and antitrust. And I said, administrative law? That's like 95% of the government? You're going to give me jurisdiction over that? So I took it. And he's like, yeah, Massie, you can have hearings on raw milk or whatever you want. So I've been doing that. I've had a hearing on the fact that 4 meat processors control 85% of the U.S. market. And I've got a bill to fix that, to empower, not by going in and busting them up and having the government sit there with guards and say, are you colluding, but by giving small processors and farmers and consumers the power to get the USDA the hell out of their lives.
You know, another thing we'll do that is kind of like, because the administrative state has been unaccountable, you know, you have like the Department of Education has like SWAT teams and stuff. We are going to eliminate that nonsense. I mean, they should not be militarized. They're politically weaponized, and then they're militarized. Like, that is totally unacceptable. So you're going to see these IRS agents, Department of Education, like, that is just a non-starter with me. They should not be wielding that power.
Governor, I wanted to tell you, as soon as I heard Congressman Massie was endorsing you, that guaranteed my vote.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
So I just want you to know that. To all the Ron Paul and Rand Paul caucus goers, and also there's a lot of liberty lovers in New Hampshire too, what's your message to those voters that if you just wanted them to know one thing about you before they vote?
Well, I'll let Thomas answer that, but I think what he would say is that, you know, we're talking about Second Amendment rights, very important. We talk about other things, but when was the time where our rights were most in jeopardy? It was during COVID. And who was willing to stand up? Very few. I was one of the ones that was willing to stand up, take the heat, take the attacks, to make sure that my people were able to work, go to school, and to be able to make their own decisions. We banned vaccine passports in the state of Florida. We banned COVID vaccine mandates on employment. And we made sure that that wasn't being weaponized against people. So I think in terms of liberty, that was the #1 threat to liberty that we have faced, and certainly in my lifetime. And very few were able to stand up. And not only did we stand up, we beat Fauci on all these things. We made Florida the free state in this country.
So my gateway into understanding the Constitution was actually the Second Amendment. And by the way, if you all didn't have constitutional carry, I wouldn't have come here today. But so thank you for getting that passed, okay, you guys in the legislature. But my gateway was the Second Amendment, and it was always my litmus test was you ask a politician about the Second Amendment, and if they start out their sentence with duck hunting, meh, I am not voting for you. I like duck hunting. That's great, but that is not what the Second Amendment is about. And if you don't understand the Second Amendment, chances are you don't understand any of the rest of that document. Okay? That's still, and Ron gets it. But my litmus test is now different. After COVID, the day before they started 15 days to slow the spread, I could see this coming down. And I tweeted, I said, I fear that the infringements of our liberties in the next year are going to be greater than FDR's internment of Japanese Americans in camps. Now, I did that to kind of upset the Democrats and remind them that, like, the tyranny came from their president, right? So they got mad at that, but unfortunately what I said was true. Like all of our, and there still are Republicans. They're still presidential candidates who don't get this. They do not. There's one presidential candidate who was responsible for perpetuating some of this tyranny, okay? And I was taking the brunt of that. And then there's some candidates, we don't know where they were when COVID happened, right? I think they were trying to sell drugs and, and more data to the government on people. Okay. And then there are just people who went along to get along, okay? All of those people constitutionally are disqualified for service. And the governor put his finger on it. The greatest threat to liberty that's happened in my adult lifetime was during COVID, and this is the only guy who was fighting when it could have cost him his position in government.
And so not only that, but then looking forward, we need a reckoning for what happened in this country. We need to hold these agencies accountable, Fauci, everything. Because right now, they would do the same thing all over again. Yep. They'd run the same playbook. And we need to make sure that this will never happen in our country ever again. I'm the only one running who will do that. I'm the only one that even talks about doing that. The rest want nothing to do with it. They do not want to upset the apple cart. They don't want to upset their buddies in some of these industries. But look, I mean, we have a responsibility. You think about the 21st century. We've had three major events, I think, in America above all else. 9/11 and the wars that followed, the financial crisis and the Great Recession, and then COVID. And of all three of those, COVID had the widest impact across the country because, some people got COVID. Obviously, people got sick. Obviously, there were deaths, which is a huge thing. But then even people that never got it or never knew they had it, they were restricted or they were implicated some ways in many of these places around the country. So we've got to have a reckoning. I'm going to bring the reckoning, and this country is going to be better off for that reckoning. Yeah, but it's interesting. Iowa's got a pretty good Navy tradition. In fact, we were just talking about it coming up. Yeah. So it's interesting. And one of the guys, as a former baseball player, Bob Feller was in the Navy in World War II, and he could have just been traveling and pitching and entertaining troops, but he's like, no, I want to go to war. Go ahead. Well, can you switch to Iowa by January 15th? Is that legal? Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things. I mean, one, because of the inflation and everything with COVID, it's been a problem nationwide just generally. Two, I think you have a lot of movement to things like ESG and climate change and stuff, which is causing these policies to be more expensive, which I don't think is a legitimate way to do it. We've kneecapped ESG a lot in Florida, mostly with our pensions, but I do think it's getting into that industry. And then, just in Florida, obviously we have storms and stuff. We've actually done some reforms, and we've had 6 companies come back in, and we got another 5 in the hopper. So to have 11 in a year come in, that's different. I think because they've been leaving California or whatever. When we saw the problem, we did stuff to do. But I think I'm concerned about this ESG. I'm concerned about them trying to say climate change and everything, because that's going to make some of these things very, very expensive if they're pricing in all these things that very well may not happen. And that's new from where we were 20 or 30 years ago. Yep.
criminals and not able to own guns. What can be done about that? I mean, besides not passing it, these veterans don't deserve that. Just because they have PTSD doesn't mean they can't own a gun. They're not going to go out and shoot people.
Well, right. No, and I don't think post-traumatic stress should be a disqualifier at all. But here's the thing: we, and I think Matt mentioned it, but it was Donald Trump that said his policy on guns was that he wanted to take the guns first, go through due process later. That is not constitutional to do that, okay? And here's the thing. It's not even necessarily about a Second Amendment. Obviously, it implicates that. But government can't come and take your TV set without due process. Government can't come and take your refrigerator from you without due. That's the whole idea, that you have the right to life, liberty, and property that can't be deprived unless they give you due process. And that's what you have to have. So I don't understand why we would want to say that somehow due process doesn't matter. And I do worry about how that would be utilized, because we have a government that has weaponized agencies. And if you're in like a blue jurisdiction, Katie barred the door. Why would you want to give the government any more power over your freedoms? I think they absolutely would abuse that. I don't think there's any question about that, and I think it'd go far beyond veterans. I think that there are, because we sit here and talk about legal system, but we've got some serious problems with how this system's been perverted. And you look in some of these areas, I don't know that you get adequate due process. Elected judges, very left-wing areas. So I think it would be a huge risk to a lot of people just on the weaponization angle.
Yeah, and there's something going on right now that a whistleblower told me about, and I've tried to introduce legislation to fix it, but it's pushing a string uphill until we get somebody like Governor Ron DeSantis. Here's the problem. Some veterans, let's say they're 50% disabled and they apply for 90% disability. That involves an interview and a doctor asking questions. And one question they ask is, do you manage your own finances? And if you say you do not manage your own finances, they now decide that you are not qualified to own a gun, have one in the house, or ammunition in the house. And the way they impose this is they send you a letter, they approve your 90% disability, which for some people may mean they're not homeless, right? They get to make their rent payment so they get an envelope in the mail that's got two things in it. Number one, we've approved your disability. Number two, sign away your rights, acknowledging that you're subject to the Brady law here. And so that's how they pressure veterans who are disabled into giving up their rights to own a gun. And the only litmus test they're using is if you answer that question wrong, it might be that your wife controls the 401k or the stock so that you own, and you answer honestly, they take your guns away. This is sad. They were going to do it at the Social Security Administration, and they had already promulgated this rule. But it was in Obama's last 6 months in office, so we were able to undo it through the Congressional Review Act when he lost his reelection. But we are not able to do it with this VA issue, and these are the things. Like Ron has been in Congress 6 years before he was governor. I've been in there 11 years now. We know where the problems are. We just can't find a president who will do anything about them. But we got one here.
All right.
My question is, obviously, as you know, massive big countries have soft power. They exercise that across the world, right? China and Africa. China, sadly, Confucius Institute here in the U.S. As the U.S., we've got the freaking pride flag at embassies across the country. The pride flag at the White House being centered with two American flags next to it. As president, how do you sort of envision how you would exercise the country's soft power? Because obviously that brings some certain advantages to our allies across the country. They kind of like they're seeing what Russia is doing, but they tend to align with Russia on certain values that Americans used to have, in which they're sort of seeing what the country is portraying across the world, and they're not really into that.
Well, clearly, when I'm president, our embassies are going to fly the American flag. They're going to fly the American. That's it. I mean, this is ridiculous. And so that's what we'll do. So you can count on that. Look, China. I've actually done something about what, and you're right, China is doing this, and I've actually done something about it. So, for example, in Florida, I banned China from buying land in our state. I don't want them buying farmland, land near military bases, none of that. So we just said no, and we have every right to do that. We ejected them from our universities. We got rid of the Confucius Institutes that they put in to try to spew the propaganda. We've also done things on trade secrets, all this other stuff. But China has really effectively used their power to exercise authority over our own society. You know, they have police stations, their own police stations in our country where they police Chinese citizens who are here. Why you would let that happen, I have no idea. I don't think there's any authority to do it. So we're going to be, I think, good as president on combating the influence of the CCP throughout this country. And I think it's a really, really important. Yes, the hard power. We have to have more hard power than them in the Indo-Pacific. Yes, the economic relationship needs to change where we're not so dependent on them and intertwined with them, and we'll do that. But you also have to deal with what they're doing here in the United States. So we'll have a strong posture in terms of being proud of America. I think we stand for really important principles and values, and I think ultimately whatever anyone else is selling around the world, you don't see people trying to break through the Great Wall of China to get into China. I can tell you that. You see a lot of people doing whatever they can to get into this country. And yeah, we shouldn't allow them to come in illegally like we are at all. But the fact that for all that the left does to complain about this country, you know, I don't see them moving to Russia or China or Iran. They're not doing that. And so we still, in spite of all our problems and all that, we get more right because we have a great Declaration of Independence and a great Constitution. So let's revive those things and let's turn this country around. That's all we got to do. So that's a great question. So obviously, federal government, we're not going to allow infringements, particularly through the bureaucracy. We'll have a Republican Congress. I don't think you have to worry about them passing legislation to infringe. But you have this situation where California, we did this debate. They put on the thing the shooting differences, and California had more than Florida, even though they have all these really restrictive and onerous laws that violate people's rights. And the governor out there said he wants to get rid of the Second Amendment is his position. So how do you do that? Yeah, you're not doing harm and you're protecting you from the federal government, but the state governments are doing that. One thing is, I think, the type of judges that you're appointing on the courts. And we've had judges who may be more conservative on a lot of things, but just have not wanted to really deal with firearms cases for whatever reason. It's almost like they view it as kind of like a second-class citizen in the Bill of Rights almost, that they're willing to do anything on First Amendment, they're willing to do others, but they just don't really want to deal with that kind of Second Amendment. So we're going to have judges that are going to say that the Second Amendment says what it means and means what it says, and it should be applied based on the original understanding, and that should be done in ways that vindicate people's rights when they're threatened. So I'll be in a good position to do that. It's interesting on the Supreme Court. You look at how the court is now, people say it's a 6-3 conservative court. That's not really true. You have 3 liberal judges who will always be in lockstep on any high-profile case. You don't even have to worry. You just put them down. Then you've got 2 constitutional conservatives, Thomas and Alito, who get it right almost every time. But then the other 4 really vary. You have Chief Justice Roberts, who, sometimes there, sometimes there. Then you've had all Gorsuch, Barrett, and Kavanaugh, the 3 Trump judges, who have ruled well most of the time, but have also not ruled great on some cases. And so the next president, certainly if you serve 8 years, would likely have to replace Thomas and Alito. And so when you're doing that, If you replace them with the justices similar to what Trump appointed, that actually moves the court to the left. Because they've set the standard. So I'm in a position, having kind of understanding these issues, I'll be able to appoint, first of all, you're never going to find someone as good as CT. That's just not going to happen. But somebody in that mold who understands the original understanding of the Constitution and is willing to rule correctly when the media doesn't like it, the left doesn't like it, and all on down the line. And so you can count on me to do that. I think you may be able to appoint 4 over 8 years and really leave a legacy of a court for 25 years. Because if we don't win the election and the Dems come in, they're going to be able to undo the progress on the court probably in the next 4 years. And that will be a liberal majority that will run roughshod over this country. And here's the thing. We used to complain about some of these liberal judges like Ruth Bader Ginsburg or whatever. The people that are coming out of these law schools now are much, much more ideological and extreme than what was being produced 50 years ago. And so that's where the left's going to look. And it'll be a massive transfer of power from the American people to likely just 5 liberal unelected judges. So I know that in 2016, the court was front and center for a lot of conservatives because of the death of Justice Scalia. We knew that there was going to be an appointment that needed to be made, and that certainly was a big motivator for me. And I remember at the time, there's a lot of conservatives that did not necessarily want to vote for Trump, and my argument was, look, do you want Hillary to replace Scalia, or do you want Trump to do? He has a list. He says he's going to pick from it. And so that caused a lot of conservatives to go out and vote when they maybe weren't as hot on doing it. But I think the court in this election is going to be huge. I think it goes to the rights in the states to make sure that the federal Constitution is enforced, and it's going to have so many more implications on and on down the line. So I will get those appointments right for you. You're not going to have to worry about me putting somebody on who then disappoints us like we've seen throughout history. Well, listen, we're out of time. I want to thank everyone for coming. I know many of you have signed up to support us, and I thank you for that. If you haven't, I hope you'll sign up to commit to caucus for us before you leave today, and I hope everybody is willing to go work your friends, family, your neighbors, your coworkers to bring out more support for us on January 15th. You decide who the next president's going to be. The media doesn't get to decide. The pundits don't get to decide. You here in Iowa get to decide, and with me, you have somebody that is earning it, that is showing up, answering questions, doing what it takes, because that is what you deserve, somebody that shows up, listens to you, and will take all that great wisdom up to Washington so we can drain this swamp once and for all. Thank you all. God bless.